At any given moment, somewhere in the world, a hospital is running because a Filipino nurse refused to quit. A cargo ship is moving because a Filipino seafarer stayed awake through the storm. A family is fed because a Filipino worker sent money home instead of spending it on rest. This is not coincidence. This is a hidden system quietly holding the modern world together. You don't see it in headlines or history books, but you feel it in daily life. This is the story of why the world depends on Filipino work and how one ordinary life reveals an extraordinary truth. Our story begins with Mateo Cruz, a fictional Filipino man in his early 30s, standing on a crowded street in Manila before dawn. Around him, buses roar to life, vendors arrange food, and the city breathes like a restless machine. Mateo isn't famous, he isn't rich. He's waiting for a call that could change his life, a job offer overseas. Like millions of Filipinos, Mateo was raised on a quiet understanding passed down through generations. Someday you may have to leave, so others can stay. Mateo grew up watching his mother work two jobs, one as a local caregiver, another as a seamstress late into the night. His father had worked on ships for years, missing birthdays and holidays, sending money that kept the family alive. To Mateo, work was never just about survival. It was duty. It was sacrifice. It was love translated into labor. This mindset, deeply rooted in Filipino culture, is one of the reasons the world leans so heavily on Filipino workers, because they don't just work for themselves. When Mateo finally receives the call, it's for a logistics company in Dubai. The role is demanding, long hours, high pressure, little recognition. He accepts without hesitation. At the airport, his family gathers in quiet strength. No dramatic speeches, just hugs held a little too long. This scene has played out millions of times across Philippine airports. The country has become one of the world's largest exporters of labor, not because its people lack ambition, but because the world keeps asking, and Filipinos keep answering. As Mateo settles into his new life, he notices something strange. Everywhere he works, there are other Filipinos. In warehouses, hospitals, hotels, kitchens, ships, and construction sites. They form invisible networks of support, teaching each other, covering shifts, sharing food. Employers notice this too. Filipino workers gain a reputation: adaptable, dependable, calm under pressure. Not perfect, but resilient. In a global economy obsessed with efficiency, this quiet reliability becomes priceless. Slowly, Mateo realizes he isn't just an employee, he's part of a global backbone. The world depends on Filipino workers because they fill the gaps others leave behind. Jobs that require patience, emotional labor, physical endurance, and humility often go understaffed. Filipinos step in, not because the work is easy, but because they understand hardship. In hospitals across Europe and the Middle East, Filipino nurses carry emotional weight no machine can replace. They speak gently to patients, work overtime without complaint, and show compassion even when exhausted. This human element is something modern systems still cannot automate. Mateo's job takes him to shipping ports, where he meets Filipino seafarers, men and women who spend months at sea, ensuring global trade never stops. Over 30% of the world's seafarers are Filipino, a staggering figure rarely discussed. Without them, shelves would empty, fuel would stall, economies would slow. These workers operate behind the scenes, navigating storms and isolation. The world praises supply chains, but forgets the hands that keep them moving. Mateo begins to understand that Filipino labor isn't visible, but it is vital. One night, Mateo video calls his younger sister Ana, who dreams of becoming a nurse. She studies knowing her future may also lie abroad. This generational cycle is both strength and burden. The Philippines trains workers not just for itself, but for the world. Schools, families, and communities prepare people for global service. Critics call this brain drain, but for many families, it's survival. The global economy benefits from this pipeline of skilled, English-speaking, culturally adaptive workers, often without acknowledging the cost. At work, Mateo is promoted faster than expected. His supervisor tells him something revealing. You Filipinos don't panic. You solve problems. This calmness under pressure didn't come from corporate training. It came from a lifetime of uncertainty, natural disasters, economic instability, political challenges. Filipinos grow up learning how to adjust. This adaptability becomes a superpower in international workplaces. When systems fail, Filipinos improvise. When morale drops, they lift it. The world depends on this emotional intelligence more than it realizes. But dependency has a darker side. Mateo sees coworkers overworked, underpaid, and easily replaced. Many accept unfair conditions out of responsibility to families back home. Remittances from overseas Filipino workers sustain entire communities and significantly boost the Philippine economy. Entire nations quietly rely on this labor flow, while individuals carry the weight alone. Mateo begins to question whether the world values Filipino work or simply exploits Filipino endurance. This tension sits at the heart of the global reliance. Despite this, Filipino workers continue to show up, not because they are weak, but because their definition of strength is different. Strength is patience. Strength is sacrifice. Strength is showing up again tomorrow. Mateo remembers his father saying, "We endure so others can dream." This philosophy echoes across millions of lives. It explains why Filipino workers dominate caregiving roles, jobs that require empathy, trust, and emotional presence. In aging societies, this caregiving labor has become essential to national survival. During a global crisis, Mateo sees the truth clearly. When supply chains break and systems collapse, it's often Filipino workers who remain on the front lines. Nurses during pandemics, seafarers during trade shutdowns, caregivers during lockdowns. Their absence would be catastrophic. The world's dependency isn't theoretical, it's structural. Remove Filipino labor and entire sectors would struggle to function, yet their stories rarely lead the news. Mateo realizes this documentary-worthy truth is hidden in plain sight. Mateo starts documenting the lives around him. Short videos, interviews, moments of quiet resilience. A cleaner who supports 5 siblings, a nurse who hasn't gone home in 6 years, a driver sending money to rebuild a village after a typhoon. These are not statistics. They are human systems holding up global economies. Through their stories, Mateo sees a pattern. Filipino workers are not just filling roles, they are stabilizing forces in unstable environments. The world depends on Filipino work because it blends skill with soul, technical ability paired with care, efficiency paired with humanity. In an era racing toward automation, this balance is rare. Employers may not articulate it, but they feel it. That's why Filipino workers are rehired, recommended, and relied upon. Mateo understands now this dependency didn't happen overnight. It was built through decades of quiet excellence and cultural values passed down through hardship. Halfway across the world, Anna finally begins nursing school. Mateo sends money, encouragement, and warnings. He tells her the truth. The work will be hard, the appreciation uneven, but it will matter. Through this sibling bond, the story comes full circle. One leaves so another can rise. This personal sacrifice mirrors a national one. The Philippines gives its people to the world, and the world, knowingly or not, builds on their backs. As years pass, Mateo becomes a mentor to new arrivals. He teaches them survival skills, how to navigate contracts, loneliness, cultural misunderstandings. This informal guidance system is another reason Filipino workers thrive abroad. They build communities wherever they go. These networks reduce failure, increase retention, and stabilize workplaces. Employers benefit immensely, often without realizing the cultural infrastructure doing the heavy lifting. Mateo interviews an economist who explains it plainly. Remove overseas Filipino workers from the global economy, and labor shortages would spike overnight. Healthcare systems would buckle, maritime trade would slow, elder care would collapse in aging nations. This dependence is measurable but rarely acknowledged. Mateo's documentary begins to take shape, blending data with human stories. Numbers prove the scale, faces prove the cost. The more Mateo learns, the more he struggles with pride and anger. Pride in his people's contribution, anger at how invisible it remains. He realizes that dependency without respect is dangerous. The world relies on Filipino work, but often treats Filipino workers as replaceable. This contradiction fuels his mission, not to glorify suffering, but to demand recognition. Mateo returns home briefly after many years. The airport feels familiar and foreign. He sees the same departures, the same quiet tears, but he also sees change. Young Filipinos telling their stories online, demanding fair treatment, rewriting narratives. The world may depend on Filipino work, but Filipinos are beginning to redefine the terms of that dependence. In his final interviews, Mateo asks one question: what happens if Filipinos stop showing up? The silence that follows is the answer. Entire systems would falter. This is not arrogance, it is reality. The world doesn't just benefit from Filipino work, it relies on it, deeply and structurally. Mateo's documentary ends where it began, not with applause, but with acknowledgement. Filipino workers are not heroes because they suffer. They are essential because they sustain. The global economy runs on their discipline, empathy, and resilience. To ignore that is to misunderstand how the modern world truly works. As Mateo boards another flight, camera in hand, he no longer feels invisible. He carries a story the world needs to hear, one that challenges comfort and demands respect. This is not just a Filipino story. It is a global one, a reminder that behind every system are people, and behind many of those people are Filipinos. The world depends on Filipino work, not because Filipinos are expendable, but because they are exceptional. And exceptional, unseen labor has shaped history before. This time, the story is finally being told. Not in textbooks, not in speeches, but through lived experience.
Through quiet strength.
Through sacrifice. Through work that holds the world together. This is why the world depends on Filipino work, whether it admits it or not.